Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion now, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Love in America, now titled. Alright, what I'm going to do next with this is drop in a translucent glaze over the entire surface and then set a scene on top of this scene. So I have a black mixed up just to lay out the line work for the scene that will be cut into the translucent yellow that will go corner to corner. So here we go.
To redefine yourself as against a very large body of statistical data. All of this is dehumanizing. All of this is bad mental hygiene, usually quickly cleared away by psychedelics. Because what they show you is, that you are unique, and that the confluence of space and time that you're operating in is unique, and that any model that is put forward is, number one, provisional. Provisional means it can be abandoned at any moment. And then the second and most important thing is any model you can't understand is useless. So, most of us can't understand most of the models. I mean, who here would care to walk to the blackboard and begin to describe the first stage of quantum electrodynamics to us? And yet we all know that our world is supposedly hung on this very well thought out theory that experts are in charge of. But notice, no pun intended, but notice that if experts are in charge of it, you're not. It's absolutely useless to you. You know nothing about it. Well, so when you start peeling away and saying, well, what do I know? It turns out it gets into thin soup rather quickly. This is no cause for despair. This doesn't mean you should go back to night school and study quantum physics. That's the wrong conclusion. It means that all of this stuff that you thought were the high walls of reality are just smoke blown by somebody else. These constraints are not binding upon you at all. Somebody said to me once, their father had been a professional scientist, and he said once, I never would have seen it if I hadn't known it was there. And we all are in the habit of seeing all kinds of things because we know that they're there, and in many cases they're not there. And you just walk through and you discover all kinds of things. I mean, I am convinced that anybody who has a major psychedelic trip, at some point in that trip, their eye falls on things no human eye has ever seen before or ever will see again. It's that big in there. It's not at all clear that we're mapping generalizable reality. It may be that it's just so huge in there that never do we pass through the same matrix twice. Well, that means you can give up on closure. You can give up on any theory that will ever give you very much of a more than provisional handle on what's going on. And I think this is probably a good step to take, to open ourselves to the freedom that lies beyond culture. Culture is a kind of prison, and the only way that we know to get beyond it is to dissolve its boundaries. Now you can do that with psychedelics, and then you really explore the baseline of being, or you can dissolve it with travel. But then you dissolve your own cultural programming only to discover you've fitted yourself into somebody else's cultural programming. And this, while, definitely educational, is like a psychedelic drug. I'm not that fond of. I do a lot of traveling, but it's not the same thing as replacing space and time with some kind of alternative. That comes from doing the hard work on 5 grams inside of darkness. And really what you see, I think, is the morphogenetic field, the invisible world that holds everything together. The knit of it all, not the knit of matter and light, but the knit of casuistry, of intentionality, of caring, hope, of dream, of thought. And that all is there, but it's been hidden from us for centuries because of the exorcism of the spirit that took place in order to allow science to do business. And that, momentous and ill-considered choice then has made us the inheritors of a tradition of existential emptiness, really. But that has impelled us to go back to the jungles and to recover this thing. It's all of a piece, you see. I mean, these people in the Amazon and whatnot were keeping this cultural flame burning. But these cultures are now all dead. They are either dead or in a state of advanced, suspended animation. I mean, the best anyone hopes for when they go to a rainforest culture is that it be somehow resisting the change all around it. There's no rainforest culture that is elaborating new forms and thriving on its own terms. So all the things that were learned, the legacy of the ancestors, is now laid basically at the feet of this high-tech electronic society. And the question is, can we dream a dream sufficiently noble that we give meaning to the sacrifices that have been made to allow the 20th century to exist? I mean, my God, the amount of blood shed and infectious diseases spread around, metals ripped out of the earth, mountains moved, railways laid across continents. All of this stuff as the means to reclaiming the human birthright that science hides from us. It's a very strange enterprise. I mean, it's hard to put it across because the thing is, it's real, and we're in the effort, in the habit of thinking that the mind can move unobstructed from one edge of the universe to the other, that there are no secrets. But actually there are secrets. At least these are secrets, and hard to tell. I mean, I tell them, and you hear them, and we seem to have been allowed a cosmic dispensation. But why that is very hard for me to understand. I would have thought that this would have been headline news 20,000 years ago, right up until the present. Instead, it's very tentative. Apparently, this is very threatening to us. We are not as eager to sail over the edge collectively as we think we are. So then it becomes the function of the shaman, the gadfly, the go-between, to carry information back and forth between these worlds. I'm convinced that if there were no shamanic pipeline, there would be no human life as we know it on this planet. I mean, there could be climaxed animal life. There is no need for this higher order linguistic style of self-reflection to come into being. It's that something is plotted, something is working itself out in us. We are the cells of a much larger body, and like the cells of our own body, it's very hard for us to glimpse the whole pattern, the whole what is happening, and yet we can sense that there is a purpose, and there is a pattern. Well, the way you connect the pattern with the lower level is by dissolving the boundaries of the ego and the self into this larger thing. And then it's found to be there, reflected on many levels. It doesn't require a mechanism. Everything is obvious. If things don't appear simple to us, I think it's because we haven't thought about it long enough. So that's sort of a survey of some of this stuff. Thank you very much.
Please continue to tape 3. Mystic Fire, Video and Audio, proudly presents Terence McKenna, History Ends in Green. This is tape 3 of a 6-cassette series.
There were questions outstanding when we parted this morning, so why don't we just take that up then?
In the 60s, the refugee survey, thousands of citizens in homes in various states of grace. Civilizations were naturalizing a new paradigm with the stroke. Yesterday, the stroke is not wrong. Anybody's moving in the roots here anymore. What could be doing wrong? The door seems to have slammed shut in that paradigm. Is it our fault?
Well, I mean, as somebody who lived through all that, I guess it was the hardest lesson that we had to learn was how big a revolution you can have and how quickly they can toss water on it and have business as usual. Eric Yonch introduced me to the term metastable. And it certainly is true that many, many things are metastable. You think it looks easy to push it over, but when you start pushing, you discover that the Leaning Tower of Pisa goes 800 feet underground or something, and it's not moving anywhere. I don't know. I think that there's a real constipation in the historical process. We talk about how the 20th century is this century of tremendous change and innovation, but actually they've been remarkably successful in forestalling any true outbreak of the future. I mean, the most science fiction moment in the 20th century, or one of the most science fiction moments to date, is probably 1939. And if you think about 1939, if you think about the V-2 rockets raining down on London and Germany in the grip of a leader with a genetic race theory that he plans to establish for 1,000 years, this is science fiction style talk. Rocket bombs and master races and robot armies and all that stuff. Well, so then it was quenched. Fascism was sort of quenched. Actually, it infected everybody who got near it to the point that everybody was a fascist. But also, everybody went back to work, realizing very self-centered ideas. In the United States, what had happened was that paradise had been promised, the generation that would defeat fascism. But because it isn't easy to deliver paradise, it had to be tacky. So then you get Levittown and the suburbs and modular building and Bauhaus style of design. This is an effort to create, a proletarian paradise. The Marxists taught proletarian paradise, but the American middle class actually created it during the 50s. Then in the 60s, what happened was, the precondition for social upheaval seemed to be an extremely unpopular war being prosecuted thousands and thousands of miles from home. And then LSD, which was a unique phenomenon because so much could be made so easily. I mean, there are few weapons on Earth, even gas. It's hard to create enough poison gas to kill 1 million people. a guy with a small bathroom can create enough LSD to stun a million people. But I think that what the lesson I drew from the 60s is that history can't be rushed, and that history is not made by individuals, even righteous individuals. That, you know what Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and its people merely players. They have their entrances and their exits, and each man in his time plays many parts. It is a work of literature somehow. And the 60s, for all of what it was, it must be that it was only prelude. And they managed to get the lid back on. But I think at great detriment to themselves, because the change is like a gas. You know, if you plug the keyhole, it comes in under the door. If you plug under the door, it comes in over the transom. There's no end to it. And forestalling it makes it more violent. I mean, what I would like to see would be a conscious engineering of change, where you actually anticipate social change and try and make it easier. As a perfect example is the stupid situation now in the Middle East. It's been known since the early Carter administration that we should put policies in place which de-emphasize our need for Middle East oil. So for 20 years they looked at that situation and never did anything. Now they say they have to fight a world war because of that. Well, it's just bad management is what it is. But I think that this crisis in the Soviet Union and in the East Bloc countries, which was presented as a crisis of Marxism, is actually a crisis of centralized institutional control everywhere. And that a lot of America's assumptions will be swept away. It came first to places like Czechoslovakia and Poland, but do you think that the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and places like this can be far behind? I mean, these are oligarchic states ruled by single families. Dynastic lines is the most reactionary form of government you can have. So what I see happening in the world is fragmentation on a vast scale, to be applauded in all cases. This is not a bad thing. This is what McLuhan said would happen. It isn't going to be a world federalist state ruled from Geneva with a spaceport in Antarctica and all that malarkey. It's just going to be, thousands and thousands of local and somewhat integrated. Like the European model is interesting because there it's simultaneously falling to pieces and integrating at the same time. Integration of currency and economics, but preservation of cultural diversity, and that sort of thing seems to me to be what's happening. But nobody has to shout and nobody has to go to the streets. It's much bigger than that. And as far as the thing in the Middle East is concerned, I think probably, I'll talk more about it this afternoon, but it has an inevitability to it that is huge. The United States is in the process of playing a fairly desperate hand. They can just stand so much of all that disarmament and troop reduction stuff, and then they just finally couldn't stand it anymore. And I think it's good news that nobody is in charge of the historical process, because even the best motivated people have the wrong idea. More faith in the unconscious. It's gotten us this far, God knows. Yeah.
Alright, I like that. Kind of sets up a surreal sort of montage room, a giant telephone, cat standing on the floor, and windows and such. Bookshelf, table, and a lamp, and a bottle. So that's pretty despairing looking. Dig it. So what I'm kind of debating right now is to lay on an initial layer of highlights to let it all set up before I start layering the different elements in the room with translucent coloration as well as more opaque coloration. So there's a couple minutes left
most spectacularly in the DMT
on this memory segment.
There are these entities there,
I think.
which I call self-transforming machine elves. And they look sort of like self-dribbling jeweled basketballs. And they
I think I will go ahead and start carving out some highlights. Just kind of blocking in the tops of surfaces with a light white translucency to let it set up for further coloration and to mix in with the black outlining to make sort of a gray area in the edges. It could be interesting. So I'll mix up some white real quick.
Opaque, movemented things which look like sculptures, but you can tell when you're looking at them they're actually sentences. And the sentences are saying themselves in some weird way. And in the way that a good sentence, a good long sentence, has all its clauses operating and its articles rotating smoothly and its gerunds running up and down their tracks and everything. You know, in the same way that a good sentence does that, these little objects have this same kind of linguistic coherency. Well, then what the entities in this space are doing is they're urging me, the percipient, to explore this and to do it, to sing these songs, to make these objects condense. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this could possibly be about. In terms of new ideas about it, the only new idea I've had about it is it's occurred to me with some force over the past year and a half or so, that the conclusion that I never looked at.
Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut this here and do a second take.
That if you
Take
could
two.
ask a shaman what these entities were, he would just say without hesitation, oh, these are the ancestors. These are the spirits of the ancestors. There's a hair-raising quality to contacting these things. They are both very familiar and yet somehow freakishly bizarre. And the presence of the familiarity with the bizarre creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that's very, well, there's just nothing else that feels quite like that. I wrote an introduction recently for a reprint of Evans Vence's book, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. And I discovered when I reread that book that the doctrine of purgatory, which is good church doctrine, it's a realm where souls go to be cleansed for a few millennia. They're not so sinful that they go to hell, but they go to purgatory for a few thousand years before they enter heaven. Well, I always assumed that this idea was came out of the Roman contact with Gnostic ideas, but I discovered in writing the introduction for the Fairy Faith that St. Patrick invented the idea of purgatory. And he invented it when he was converting the Irish to Christianity. He did it as a way to Christianize the notion of fae, of fairyland. And the Celtic pure belief is that the dead go to a realm that is co-present all around us. Well, we can't see them. But the all around us is just jammed with souls in wild states of activity. And that if you have the eye, a certain talent, you can see these things. Well, Patrick, in order to have an appeal to these Celtic peasants, made purgatory part of the Christian cosmogonic scheme. But when you actually smoke DMT, you burst into a space which seems very much to fit the description of this elfin inhabited space. Because if you think about what is the gnosis of elves, elves are artificers. They make things in metal and jewels and glass. This is the archetype of the elves, that they are underground craftsmen, and they are humorous, but their humor is highly unpredictable and sort of not necessarily running in your favor. And they're somewhat cruel and boisterous and like that. Well, when you break into this space, you discover, that you're in fairyland. You're in fairyland as much as Darby O'Gill or any of the rest of these people who ever made it across. And the secret of the elves, what they really fabricate, is language. This is why in Irish mythology, if you can get elves on your side, you can make great poetry, because they're the keepers of linguistic artifice. And getting elves on your side makes you into a master poet. Well, it's interesting then that in the Amazon, where there's a tradition of taking DMT, there are these things called Heruki, and they're actually described as bouncing demons. And the Heruki, you're supposed to they come into being when you're stoned, and you're supposed to get them into your chest. You're supposed to invite them into your chest somehow. Well, then the number of these things you have inside of you determines what kind of a real man you are. And this is generally a male practice. Well, I noticed that these DMT types, as I call them, they jump in and out of your body too. They seem to be trying to teach you something about the body image or their relationship to your self-identity. And all the time they're saying, make these objects do what we're doing. Well, then you go down to the Amazon, to the Icaro singing ayahuasqueros, and they are using voice to make objects. So what we're on the track of here is a physiological ability, or a pharma-driven physiological ability to transduce language as something seen. Well, now you see, if you could see what I mean, it would be as though we were the same person. Seeing what I mean is a much more intimate relationship to my intent than hearing what I mean. You can hear what I mean and go and look it up in your little dictionary and get it all wrong if your dictionary and mine are different. But if you see what I mean, we will be in agreement, because I see what I mean too. So if meaning were something that one could sculpturally command in two-dimensional space, and we would walk around and look at it. Well, part of what I was doing in Linz, in Austria, was trying to get these virtual reality people hooked into this as a concept. Because you see, with the present virtual reality tech, do you all know what virtual reality is? Everybody knows what it is. Virtual reality is a technology where you put on a helmet and you have a little, and then you think you're in this place, some other place, under engineering control. Well, what you could do is you could slave the parts of English speech to geometric objects. So that, for instance, every time you use the word "and," a rotating turquoise dodecahedron appeared over your left shoulder. Similarly, all the parts of the dictionary could be slaved to physically or to visually beholdable objects. Well, then, as I would speak, this thing would be happening over my left shoulder, a kind of self-constructing grammatical tinker toy. Well, I maintained that very quickly people would stop listening and start looking, and that they would be getting it. In fact, they would be getting more than if they were listening, because the way in which these syntactically visible parts of speech can be connected and shaded and presented and emphasized and italicized and underlined and brightly colored and set in different fonts and so forth and so on. In other words, many more dimensions to the intent to communicate can be brought into play. And I think this is what technology is probably driving for, and what the psychedelic experience will inspire is this kind of sculptural linguistic modality where meaning is something that we behold. Yeah, meaning. Well, we have to find out whether there are visual types and audio types, or whether there are generalized human biases embedded in cultural conventions. You know, McLuhan talked about how at the inventing of printing, there was a shift from the eye culture, as he called it, to the ear culture, that before printing, if somebody gave you a piece of manuscript, it was in cannabula, it was written, it was manuscript, and therefore you had to look at it. After printing was invented, every E looked like every other E, and so print acquired uniformity. And uniformity, when we read, we do not look. You don't look at the page, you read it, and your eye rips to it. You don't linger over each letter and try to piece out how it's different from the other F's on that line and stuff like that. But in manuscript culture, you do. Similarly, print created an expectation then of uniformity in the way that the eye expected the letters to always present a uniform appearance. There began to be the idea of uniformity of social appearances. And previously the largest social class had been the guild, but suddenly you get people talking about the ruling class, the middle class, the lower class, white collar, blue collar. These are linear, uniform terms for describing lots of non-linear, non-uniform phenomena. And then finally, of course, with the machine age, you get the idea of interchangeability of parts. This is an idea that would never emerge could only emerge in a print culture, because in a print culture, the interchangeability of the parts of print becomes an established convention. So we say, well, we want to make tractors or hay mowers, so let's not just make one hay mower, let's make 50 of them, and let's make them all at once, and let's lay out the pieces, and then let's assemble them in teams, and this kind of thinking arises out of the bias of the technology. McLuhan talked a lot about technological biases.
Chinese idea something where we had different symbols of one tribe, and now only about 5,000 newspapers.
Well, yeah, I mean, language is becoming more glyphic. Reality is becoming more iconic. When you travel in Europe, you're aware that you're skating along on a thin surface of icons that, if you're careful, will never break through and let you down. You know, you can read all this international jargon about where the dog can poop and not to smoke and not to open the window and so forth and so on. Yeah, we need an iconic language, and we're tending back toward it. Now, an iconic language like Chinese has also undergone huge amounts of local conventionalization. So I don't think we're all going to end up learning Chinese unless it's going to return more to its ancient form. Mayan is an interesting case because Mayan is a rebus language where you use icons not to symbolize things but sounds. Do you see the difference? So, for instance, if we want to, in rebus language, you would put a picture of an eye, a saw going through wood, an ant running across the ground, and a rose. And that would be a sign which said, I saw ant rose. the icons symbolize sounds, they don't symbolize meaning. This makes it hellishly difficult to reconstruct a lost language that is written this way, because the language, what you have are the symbols of sounds, and you don't have the sounds anymore. So how do you reconstruct the language? This is the problem my decipherment has had to grapple with. Yeah.
So, you want a shadow on top of it? No, because figuring out how to shadow on top of that with
Not with the community. I've known deaf people, and yes, you're right. This thinking in pictures, and this is something that happens at certain points in most psychedelic experiences. You realize that the quality of our ordinary thought, which is, in my case, it is language. It's a stream of words, and then it can become this much richer, fuller, imagistic type thing. This is very elusive. I mean, it's so close to the level of human organization, but probably there's some people in this room who are doing it right now. There are art movements like the pre-Raphaelites or the Romantics that put great stress on
So
this kind of
now
thing.
I may re-emphasize the underscene as well as
I
the
think that we're,
overscene.
Nicola is trying to get
kind
at
of
this
play
by
them,
talking about the effects of technology. It's
together.
that we haven't realized just how
you'll see
fluid
How
the
it
mental
develops from here, but I like
modality
that
is.
step. Glad I went ahead and did that.
Thomas
Just got back from garage art
in the
today,
Middle
and
Ages
it's a little
was
tired,
thought
but
to
this
be a
one's
great
set up,
saint.
and
he would prove his sainthood
decided to go
by they
ahead
would come to him with
and
with a
start
Bible,
on it
with
to get it
of,
ready for the week.
theology,
Because
and they would open it and
as soon as I got the initial step
and
down,
look at
it occurred to me what I should
and
do
then
next.
close it and
But I had to wait 2 days
question
for it to
him about
dry.
it, and he could answer
So here we go.
questions.
I'll take this off.
And they thought this was a proof.
It's getting late though. It's going to take a little while to get this online
And
too.
all he was doing was
And also
silent.
for you YouTube
He was
folks,
the only man
I am now in
who could
4K.
silently read.
So if you go to your settings under HD, you can flip me up to a resolution that's just crazy. And it really gives a very nice
It's not even as hard as riding a bicycle.
window
How names are there where we are down between
into
narrow walls of expectation
the process.
and just a little
And Final
bit
Process
of
movies will now be in 4K as well.
One of the things that fascinates me about the psychedelics
So,
that we haven't talked
but that's it
about
for the moment. I'm going to go to bed after I get this up. Thanks for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting love in America.
It isn't that
Have a good night, Earth.
strangers